This investor lost 50 grand in just 2 months through what I think is one of New Zealand's worst property scams. And you're about to learn how that happened, along with all 5 of the property scams you've got to avoid in 2026. So in this episode of the Property Academy podcast, you're going to learn what these 5 property scams are, how much they could cost you, and importantly, how to avoid them. Now, Danubia Pam, she had just moved to New Zealand from Brazil. She wants to build wealth and make money. So she turns up to a 3-day property investment event and ends up buying, at the end of it, a lifetime mentoring or property coaching program. Now, it costs her $50K, but she thinks it's worth it. Now, she doesn't have the money to do it, so she ends up getting a bank loan and 2 credit cards. But it turns out it wasn't a lifetime coaching or mentorship course at all, because just a few months later, the company goes bust. Now, she can't get any of her money back. She's still got the debt that lasted, for the lifetime of however long it took her to pay it off.
It was a lifetime lesson.
But there are a few lifetime coaching courses out there, and not all of them are scams, right? I'm definitely not saying that, Andrew. But I do think that this one was, because the salespeople working for that company or the owners of that company must have known that the company was on shaky ground and had the potential to close down. But I just think it is so scammy and terrible that they got a young person in their 20s to put up 50 grand when the company was going to collapse only about 2 months later. And so I do think that scam number 1 to be aware of is the kind of too good to miss lifetime coaching course. But that's not the only scam that people should be aware of. What do you think scam number 2 is?
I think another big one to be wary of is the property developer fund. So this is where an investor puts cash into a fund and then the developer pays a return on that. Normally it's kind of that 10% kind of level, so it's a healthy return. And the developer uses that money to lend to themselves to complete projects and basically use that instead of a developer finance loan from a financier. And now, just to be clear, not every developer fund is a scam. We're not saying that, but they are more risky, and we've seen this with the likes of, say, Deval, for example. So they raised a whole lot of money from the public, and then they were taking investors' money to fund projects, and now the Deval group of companies are in statutory management. And sadly, investors who put money in those mortgage funds are probably unlikely to see any of that money get returned. And we've seen an example, actually. There was a really sad case where there was a single mum, a divorcee, who put a couple of $100 grand into the Deval fund. She is resigned to the fact that she probably won't see any of that money back now. She put that money in there thinking, this is a great return. It's a mortgage security. It's got a mortgage security, so it's probably safe, not really understanding the complexities around that type of investment and the risks that go with that come along with the higher return. And there has been a growing concern, particularly from the FMA, around warning some of these providers, these property investment firms and developers, from how they're actually going to protect the public when they are taking money for such an investment.
The real issue is that to even invest money in these, you've got to sign a special wholesale investor certificate to say that, yes, I'm a sophisticated investor. But then when the FMA investigated this, it turns out that a bunch of those investor certificates were not actually valid. And I think that's the kind of scam risk with this one, not necessarily the property fund itself, but the fact that some of those certificates were signed and actually they were ineligible. They weren't correct. The investors didn't qualify. And I think when we're talking about scams, we're not necessarily talking about, fake companies.
Selling, not a Ponzi scheme.
Not selling non-existent products, but it's anything that potentially sells you the wrong idea, that could be misleading, that could be deceptive or half true, or maybe even lacking some key context, because that kind of broad version of a scam is typically how you see people use that word online. But if I think about, scam number 3, it's some of the massive rental guarantees that I am seeing property developers especially being promoting at the moment. And the issue that I'm seeing is that they'll come out and say, we're going to give a guaranteed rental return of 5%, a 5% rental return over the next 2 years. In fact, I was driving to work and heard it on the radio the other day. It was a former All Black, captain of the All Black, talking about this on the radio. And I just thought, but that's not true, because it's not a 5% rental return. The property might have a 4% rental return, but then the developers are topping that up and giving you a bit of extra money to get you so it's the equivalent of a 5% return, but it's not a 5% rental return. And the reason that I believe this is totally unethical and that they are hydraulicking the rent, so puffing it up to make it look bigger than it really is because they want investors to say, oh, 5% return, rental return. Oh,
that seems good.
That seems pretty good. I better do that. And the risk that I see is that people just see that, buy the property, and then once the rental return or the rental guarantee runs out, they then go, oh, this isn't as good of an investment as I thought because that extra benefit has run out. And the other thing you've got to be aware of is that let's say that the developer's putting in an extra, call it $100 a week to get you up to that 5% return. Well, that's about 10 grand over 2 years. Well, that extra 10 grand is baked into the purchase price. You're paying for it one way or the other, but it's just dressed up as, I want to call it lipstick on a pig or mutton dressed as lamb or whatever other farm analogy you want to do it. But I really do believe that is one of the most unethical pieces of marketing that I have seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think the big thing is the fact that people consider that a genuine rental return, and that's the way it's worded, rental guarantee. It's not. There is an element of rent to it, but the rest is just lipstick on the pig. And as a result, sometimes I've seen people do their cash flows and they'll put that hydraulic rent as their start rent, and then they'll have it increase every year like rent normally does. But of course, it's not going to increase every year. It's probably going to stay the same for the couple of years that you got the rental guarantee. Then it's going to drop to the normal rent. You have to do your numbers on that. Whenever someone's looking at something with a rental guarantee, I said the thing you need to do is base your numbers on true market rent and consider anything else a bonus. And if it works without that bonus, great. If it doesn't, not a good deal.
Now, what's scam number 4?
Scam number 4 is property investment experts mis-selling properties. So I'll give you an example that I saw the other day, which was not something I'm that comfortable with. Property Factory were doing some marketing for some dual key townhouses in Hobsonville in Auckland.
And these are quite interesting, right? Because
these are great looking units themselves, but they're marketing it with a gross yield of like 6.5%. Now, the idea is that you take this 2-bedroom townhouse and a separate studio unit apartment, and then you can rent them both out with 2 separate tenancies. Now,
let's look at this at the moment about how it's structured. So there's a kind of studio down the bottom. It's got a little kitchen there and an ensuite. So they're kind of calling that a live workspace. Then on the second floor, you've got a kind of kitchen, dining, living room. And then upstairs, you've got 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms.
Yep.
And so they're saying, cool, you rent out the studio unit to one person, you rent out the 2 bedrooms upstairs to some other people. Now, what's the issue with that?
So the issue is that, okay, the numbers look quite good because the overall rent, if you charge them out separately, you're going to get really high rental return. I think it was over $1,000 a week. Now, the problem is that these, based on what I've seen, are not dual key properties. To legally rent out to 2 different occupants, so not one family that's just going to use it as 2 separate parts for their collective family, you have to have a higher standard of requirements. So, for example, there needs to be fire rating, there needs to be acoustic separation, there's specific insurance requirements, you need to be able to split the power, because, of course, if you and I rent 2 different parts of the property, I don't want to have to work out how I'm going to pay your part of the bill or vice versa and whose bill is what. These particular units cannot be legally rented out as dual keys and therefore can't be marketed as them. And I think the problem is now you're misleading people into thinking, oh yeah, this is completely good. If I can, a great investment, 6.5% yield on a townhouse, if I can rent it to 2 separate people. Actually, if you're renting this to one person or one family or unit, the rent's actually more like $675 a week. So the gross yield's more like 4%, which is nowhere near 6.5% and actually not that great a yield.
Now, how do you know? Because you said based on what you've seen, these are not true dual keys. What do you mean by that?
I've been involved in so many dual key transactions and have seen developers try and sell things without these requirements being met and had pushback from councils or just in terms of the regulation around renting them out when it comes to the time where they're vacant. And actually, the funny thing is when these, because I saw these ones come through, I know these units and I thought, how the hell are they getting that number? So I put my team on to actually researching this, and the feedback was these don't meet the regulation.
So the developer confirmed with your team that these aren't actually dual keys.
Yes.
And I want to be clear because, Property Factory, we've done some podcasts talking about how they're, pretty good company. And they used to be run by a guy called Campbell Venning, who's pretty well-known and respected property investment expert. But the truth of the matter is Campbell's no longer there. He's kind of moved on and there are different operators in there. And so I do think that if what you're saying is true, that's the kind of thing that somebody who's very experienced like Campbell would have picked up on. And I just wonder, well, maybe with him moving on, the new operators just haven't caught on to some of those things that maybe a more experienced property investment expert might have picked up on. And when we're talking about scam number 4, we're talking about this kind of behavior, mis-selling a property, saying that a property is this when it's actually something a little bit different as opposed to this specific example. Now, what's scam number 5?
Scam number 5 is a tried and true one, which is the revolving credit dance. So paying your mortgage back faster using a revolving credit so that all your money goes into your bank account, you pay your bills on your credit card, and you pay it off at the end of the month, and your mortgage will be paid off in 3 years, not 30. Absolute nonsense. Lots of companies out there who have a structure where they'll charge you maybe $5,000, maybe $10,000 to get everything set up correctly. And there is no magic secret. There is no silver bullet when it comes to paying off your mortgage faster other than putting extra money onto your mortgage.
And the scam here is that people, or specifically mortgage advisors, saying that they've got some sort of special system where they are able to help you pay your mortgage off faster and it costs you $5,000, when in actual fact, most mortgage advisors, if you've been working with one, will set you up with a revolving credit and give you a good understanding of how it works, without it costing you anything, most of the time for nothing. And so the charging of the $5,000 is the part that I think, oh gosh, I'm not sure if I'm very comfortable with that. And in fact, I know of examples where investors have gone to these kinds of companies and said, now, hey, just before I pay you the money, just before I pay the $5,000, is this just a revolving credit? And they said, no, it's not just a revolving credit. You were involved in a situation like this.
Yeah, there's actually a guy in Christchurch. I don't think we've named him before, but I'm going to. Freehold Express. And they've been around for a long time. And I have had clients come to me where they have been absolutely misled. I've read the emails. I've read the information. The numbers that they've used are either they're negligent or misleading in terms of some of the ways that they've calculated things, and then they've charged people for the privilege of doing this. So I just think people need to be really aware of the fact that there is this kind of stuff going on, and everyone feels the pain of having a big mortgage and wanting to get it paid off faster. So I think it's great that people are out there giving advice, but as Ed said before, most of the advice that you will get out on how to pay off your mortgage faster through a system like this is available free. It certainly is on our website. You don't need to go and pay thousands of dollars to get it. If you're going to pay thousands of dollars, you want to make sure that you're going to get an extreme benefit for that. And I think the other part to it is, if those people then say it's not revolving credit, we use offset, or it's not offset, we use revolving credit, if it works out to be just that in the end, that's misleading, and I think someone should do something about it.
And you managed to get an investor's money back, or part of it, right?
Yeah, we did. I did actually give some advice to one particular investor that got some of their money back. I think they should have got all of their money back, but that particular guy from Freehold, it was very threatening to her. Had it been me, I would have absolutely sued and got that money back.
And even if you do get scammed or fall for some of these things that are maybe a little bit unethical, don't give up. We talked about Dani right at the start, right? She lost the 50K, took out 50 grand's worth of debt from the bank and also credit cards. But what's really inspiring is she didn't get up. In fact, she's invested in property. She, for a while, worked at our company, Opus Accelerate, when we had that, helping investors renovate their properties and get advice around that. And now, today, she started her own property investment community, ended up becoming a property coach and a financial advisor. And she said to me the other day that today her portfolio includes a mix of buy and hold properties that she's working on. And she's also got a renovation project at the moment, and that property is still her main vehicle for building wealth, despite getting stung right at the start when she first moved to New Zealand. And I think that's a really inspiring story of even when you get knocked back a few times, that you can still keep going. We've actually got a previous podcast where she told the entire story. So debt is not naturally good or evil. It's a tool that you can use. And some people will use debt and get crushed by it, while others will use it to build wealth. But it comes down to how you use it and what you buy with that debt. And if you found this useful, you've got to check out this next one about how this investor owns 43 properties but wish he'd learned this sooner. He breaks down the exact stages, lessons, and mistakes that he made along the way. Click here to watch it now.